Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you on this. It's Wednesday. We're kind of back a little bit on the normal schedule for our weekly show. Now, when I say that kind of tongue in cheek because, as I mentioned last week, YouTube has decided to throw us for a bit of a loop. And Google Hangouts has decided to throw us for a bit of a loop. So we're trying to work through it. We were, for those of you maybe that were kind of checking out some things earlier with our channel, I was kind of testing some stuff out, and hopefully you weren't confused. But we've had to try out new software. We've had to try out a bunch of new things. So for those of you tuning live to the YouTube channel, if you can, please let us know that you can see and hear me and see and hear. Well, you probably won't see him this week, but hopefully you can at least hear him. He's connected via computer this time instead of over the phone. John Sheeran. John, how's it going, my man?
Yeah, as Anthony said, I don't know if you all can see me, but I am giving my co-host Anthony a resounding round of applause for the technical work that he's done to get the show to where it is right now. Like he said, YouTube threw a giant wrench at our faces, and he has stepped up to the plate and somehow made it work. He says he actually told me before the show he's not technically savvy, but I don't know if I could have done anything close to what he did to make sure that we got the show up tonight. But we are here and we're ready to talk Bengals.
Yeah, I think it sounds like that people are able to see me and hear me. I think they can hear you, which is good. Unfortunately, they're not seeing your beautiful face or that very, very svelte figure of Randall you have in the background. But
yeah, Randall's more mad about it than I am. I didn't take a shower today, so I'm feeling a little musty. But yeah, Randall, he's getting some makeup done actually, and he'll be ready for whenever we get back on camera.
Well, I appreciate your patience as well, John. This has been a process, man. I'm telling you, I appreciate your kind words, but this has been a process to get to kind of do this. But we're calling audibles. We're trying to get this going. We appreciate those who are tuning in live. We will get this dialed in. I promise. We'll get it all figured out. Unfortunately, we had a process when we do this show. We had a process that we always had done for basically three and a half years. Kind of had that dialed in, and then all of a sudden, there's a big change with the platform. So either we will continue to do these live YouTube, try and do it through YouTube, kind of how we're doing it right now. Hopefully being able to add in the video of John as well as his audio, kind of like we've always done, or we may have to do a different platform, and we still want the live interaction from viewers. We'll keep you updated, I promise. Everything's still good to go in terms of the various places you can get this program. Our stuff still is on YouTube. The audio can be found on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify. It can be found on Google Play, the Megaphone platform, as well as on cincyjungle.com. We may be expanding the reach a little bit on where we'll be getting this show, but we'll keep you updated on all of that. On tap for this week, there's a lot going on. There's some news about the running backs, both kind of positive and negative, both involving injuries. So we're going to talk about the running back positions. John Sheeran, my co-host, put up a post recently on cincyjungle.com kind of doing a roster projection. Some news that came out Wednesday about the running back spot may tweak some things, but for the most part, I thought it was very interesting, and there is a discussion to be had about some of the bubble roster players, some guys that John omitted from making the final roster there, and I think we need to talk about that. He'll also give us some of his further training camp. He's been there firsthand since our last show. He's been to a few more practices. He'll maybe give us a few more pieces of insight there. And then, of course, we're going to talk about preseason game number 1, the very first time the Bengals are going to get in real action of some kind against another team in the Zach Taylor era. So we'll talk about that. We were going to get to listener questions tonight, but I think we're going to hold off until Friday afternoon, Friday evening for that. So we'll be sure to get you a time on that. For now, it'll probably be about maybe 6 Eastern or so, to have a special standalone listener question segment where you can call in, text in, leave us some chat stuff, and we'll get that going. We do want to make sure that is still part of this show. So, we're going to have that. It just for the sake of time. And of course, obviously, it coming up against the start of the preseason. I think people will be excited to send us some questions there. So we will get that to you. Whew, we're going to take a deep breath and getting all the housekeeping stuff out of order. One thing I did kind of want to tee the show off with just for a little bit. And John, I'd like to get, your thoughts and sentiments on this as well. This isn't a political show. This isn't anything like that, but we would be remiss if we did not mention our saddest or deepest sympathies and whatnot to really over the past couple of weeks, 3 different areas in the United States that have experienced a form of mass shooting. One was in Northern California, one was in El Paso, Texas. And one, of course, was very close to where a lot of our listeners and a lot of Bengals fans are based in the Dayton area. So, it really is shocking. It's really something that jars you to your core. There are a lot of thoughts and things that I could share that, could make this maybe a bit contentious. And I don't really want to do that because of the political scope and all of that. But this kind of stuff has to stop. And, it's like I said, it's shocking. It's becoming a thing where they're becoming more and more common, unfortunately, and they are turning into a thing where it's disrupting things that people do in their everyday lives. It's disrupting, it's becoming a thing that is making people, or the intention is to make people fearful doing things they enjoy or anything like that. It's easier said than done, but we just can't let things like that stop us. I went to a concert, truth be told, on Saturday night, and I kind of had a side eye that night because of some news, using peripheral vision, seeing, who's got what here. And it's a jarring feeling. And I'm sure all of us have experienced that. I have also, truth be told, personally experienced losing somebody from gun violence, losing a family member from gun violence. And so I have some very personal feelings about things like this, but not to go on a rant or anything, but we just wanted to make sure that we recognize those terrible tragedies, that we give our condolences to anyone affected. And, obviously this is something, John, that hits a little bit close to home for Ohioans, for Bengals fans, because one of those was in the city of Dayton.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word shocking, and the only thing that's shocking to me is how it continues to happen, and nothing really seems to be happening to stop it or prohibit it in any way, shape, or form. Like just a couple weeks ago, Bengals fans were mad at the city of Dayton for making them practice on a field that was fine for high schoolers, but apparently not fine for professional athletes. And this kind of stuff really just puts things into perspective. Yep. And the city of Dayton has gone through a hell of a lot this summer, not only with the tornadoes, but now also with this. But I think this is like shooting number 250 for this country, and like the second country in that ranking is at like 3 right now. So it's this kind of stuff only really happens here, and I guess we just don't want to do anything about it. But yeah, you're right. It just really puts things into perspective and really changes our lives for the worse. Like there was a video like last night, just people at Times Square, they overhear a motorcycle backfire and panic ensues because someone thinks someone is open fired. So like this stuff just shouldn't happen in any modern society, but it really does put things into perspective, and our hearts obviously with those families that were impacted in California, Texas, and Dayton, but thoughts and prayers can only do so much when people keep dying for senseless acts.
I understand. Yeah. And I understand that, the action of some kind is needed. And there's a lot of different standpoints or viewpoints on what kind of action would be needed to help curb or stop these altogether. Obviously, the bottom line is, I mean, at this point, what we can give is our condolences, our prayers, our thoughts. That is what we can give. There are ways to help financially. Some of these things, there are ways to volunteer. You know, I started a charity for my sister, and my co-host graciously, you know, contributed to that, as did some of our listeners and other Bengals fans. There are many others like that are from gun violence, and Dayton has one, a trauma fund, I believe, set up. And kudos to the Cincinnati Bengals, because kind of segueing out of that topic and into this a little bit, kudos to the Cincinnati Bengals, because they it came across the wire this week that they gave $75,000 to that fund to help affected people in the city of Dayton. So you're right, John. It really puts, you know, we're complaining about the field quality and all that kind of stuff a week ago, and now, you know, we have this situation. It really puts things into perspective. But for those who may have been affected, to those who live in the city of Dayton, to those who live in the city of El Paso, or any of these areas, we're with you. We've definitely you know, been thinking about you, and you know, hopefully these things just stop occurring altogether. It would be nice to not to have to address these types of things, but you know, stay strong, Dayton. That's all I can say. Thanks for indulging us on that. Let's get going on some Cincinnati Bengals player talk, some actual X's and O's and things of that nature, with training camp in full swing. John, I guess we can start with your roster projection, which I thought was very interesting, because there were some spots that were really light. There were some players that I find very intriguing that you had left off. There were some players that I don't know. There's a lot of I think, and as it goes with any projections like this, there are a lot of areas that seem to be, it could be called in bait. So with that, if you can, maybe give everybody a mile high overview of what you did, and then we can kind of dissect some of the areas that I think a lot of people may have some questions about.
Right. So we've done a few of these this offseason, and for the most part, most of this has maintained some sense of consistency. The main areas that I altered for this week, just based off what I've seen from him, what we read from reports and whatnot, was going for 7 wide receivers, including Damian Willis, with the group of AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, Alex Erickson, Josh Malone, and Cody Core. Going light at tight end with just 3, them being C.J. Zoma, Tyler Eifert, and Drew Sample. And then on the defensive side of the ball, only going with 4 defensive ends: Dunlap, Hubbard, Lawson, Kerry Wynn, and 5 defensive tackles in Geno Atkins, Andrew Billings, Ryan Glasgow, Christian Ringo, and Reynold Wren. And this is mainly in part for basically what the rotations are like at those respective positions so far in camp, and probably going into week 1 of the preseason. But I guess we can really start with the first couple of positions on offense. I had 3 quarterbacks with Dalton, Driscoll, and Finley, but this was before Finley started taking second team reps with the team, starting on Family Day last Saturday, and actually I think the past couple practices as well. So I think there's a slight shift in that, where Driscoll's spot may not be entirely safe, and that's the whole point with that, is that they would only go 3 if they want to keep Driscoll, because Finley's pretty much making the team. So if Finley does start ascending that, like, he can just push Driscoll off the roster, and that opens up another spot. And this was also before Rodney Anderson. We'll get to Rodney Anderson news in a minute, but this was before they had some injury issues at running back, and maybe they want to go light there because, you know, AJ Green is still hurt, and he's probably not going to go to injured reserve, designated to return, or the pup list. So maybe they go 7 receivers, because if they want to go 3 receivers, you know, playing for most of the snaps, you know, you would have to figure that they're going to have at least 5 or 6 active. And if you're not going to have your best one there, you might as well get, you know, maximize depth there. And at this point, it's just hard to leave Willis off the roster altogether with the movement and the momentum he has in training camp so far. But at the same time, you have to keep Malone and Core on there, because they're getting starting reps without Green and also John Ross on the roster. And then with all that said and done, you're at a point where you're looking at the tight ends, and you're thinking, okay, maybe we go 3 to begin the season while Green is still hurt, and when Green comes back, maybe we add up a guy like a Mason Strack, a Jordan Franks, or even a Ethan Carter to really get that group back to 4, because they're probably going to need 4 for the season with Eifert still healthy. So those are the main changes that I made from the roster projection I did before training camp. But obviously, as we've seen, things are really fluid right now, and there's a lot of rotations going on, a lot of battles and competitions going on at multiple positions. And honestly, if I did it today, it probably would have made a little bit of difference because that's just how quickly things are moving right now in this Zach Taylor-led team.
So I'm looking at it, and I see Deshaun Davis off the list. I see Josh Tupou and Andrew Brown, defensive tackles, off the list in terms of being cut. I see, like you said, a Mason Schreck, an Auden Tate. I see, well, we'll get to running back in a second, but kind of those areas. And then, of course, you had, like you said, you had Jordan Willis off. So who was kind of the one where you're like, oh man, that's a really tough. Like, who were some of the toughest of those names that you were like, I had a real tough time not putting them on my projection?
I think Tate stands out the most, at least on offense, just because in camp right now, he's getting first team special teams reps. He's like with the first team unit on kickoff return with Fedulum, with Cody Core, with Hardy Nickerson. And Nickerson was another guy you're thinking, okay, he's still getting those first team reps on special teams. He's still the Mike linebacker with the second team defense. So you have to think he's at least safe for now. And that includes leading off a guy like Deshaun Davis or an undrafted guy like a Sterling Sheffield, who I think right now is making a lot of moves and at least building positive momentum with the coaching staff. But definitely Tate stood out to me as a guy who's going to probably make it down to the final wire. And I just think he has to just hold off from the hype that Damon Willis is building up. And even Stanley Morgan, he hasn't completely disappeared. He's still getting opportunities. He's actually getting opportunities as a kick returner. The other practice that I went to, and he's still making plays in the red zone, at least in those drills. And obviously Jordan Willis is another one. Like, 4 edge defenders might not be the way they go, but I think right now they see more value and win not only as a veteran, but a guy who can play multiple spots, a guy who's getting first team reps with a nickel pass rushing unit. So yeah, like it's a weird dynamic because you look at this roster, you put it up against the 31 other rosters, and it's probably not in the top half, but there's still a lot of guys who would make multiple other teams, and there's more than 53 rosterable players on this team. It's just a matter of how much the top end of that roster is going to carry them all throughout the season. But yeah, I think Tate, Willis, both Willises really are going to come down to the wire, and even guys on the offensive line. Like, I couldn't bring myself to eliminate the 6 that I put, and that's John Jerry, Billy Price, John Miller, Trey Hopkins, Christian Westerman, and Michael Jordan. Because honestly, like, the 2 guys who I think like probably the most to lose right now is either Jerry or Westerman, and they were the 2 getting the starting reps at left guard. So it would be easy to take Jerry off the list if he wasn't getting starting reps, but apparently the team sees something in him. But that's a rotation. That's a whole nother story. There's 4 guys there that have gotten first team reps at the left guard position. So right now it's just hard to eliminate really any of them from the competition. So yeah, there's just a lot of tough decisions right now without even playing a preseason game. Hopefully we'll see more clarity in the coming days. So
we're getting a couple questions in the live YouTube chat. We're going to try and kind of address some of these, but like I said, we're going to try and we're going to have a different standalone later this week to kick off the preseason game. We're going to have a standalone listener question show, but I thought this was interesting because I'm looking at your groupings, and then I see this comment from Luis G says, so in short, and of course I'm assuming Luis is kind of being serious as a fanboy, but also being, says it a little tongue in cheek, but so in short, the Bengals are super loaded in talent and will possibly win the Super Bowl. Who dey? I look at it. It's funny that he said that because I'm looking at it and I see a couple of position groups that I'm like, wow, they've got a lot of talent in these groups. And then there are others where I go, oh boy. And it seems like a roster that has, 3 or 4 position groups that are very, very strong. And then I see a bunch of meh. I guess, you look at running backs. Well, again, we'll talk about that in just a second, but Joe Mixon, Giovanni Bernard, Travion Williams, and then potentially Rodney Anderson. We'll get to that in a second. That's a very strong group. Wide receivers is pretty strong, but it's top heavy, and it's obviously lessened with the situation with AJ Green. Tight ends, strong group, but still some question marks there. I look at the secondary. That's got to be two of the better position groups in the league in terms of cornerbacks and safeties. Those are very strong. But then you look at linebackers. You look at even interior defensive linemen behind Geno Atkins. A lot of question marks there. Edge defenders, there's some talent there, but some question marks. And then, of course, the offensive line. So I see a real mixed bag in terms of when you actually look at it, position group by position group. A couple of very strong position groups and some others that really make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I always fall for this every year, how the defensive line, I always come away with the conclusion that they're just a really strong group. And I think it's always just the effect of them going against the offensive line. So I just have to maintain my sense of actual reality with that. But honestly, like I like what I've seen from the defensive line as a whole. I haven't seen really any, at least for the guys in the first and second teams, I haven't seen any like real negatives there. Like specifically with Christian Ringo, who I added on for this edition, he's been balling his butt off with the second team, and even Andrew Brown, who I didn't have on here. I think we can almost list him as an edge defender now, because this was something that Jeff Hobson reported as well in his latest camp report, that he's been exclusively an edge rusher, and I think that might have to do with the lack of depth at edge rusher and the fact that they didn't really address the position for each seat, besides Kerry Wynn, who again is probably a lock for the roster at this point. But I think we can include Brown with that group at edge. And I don't know if it really helps his case necessarily to make the roster, but like that interior right now is really packed with a lot of guys who have a lot to prove. And obviously, like Wren is probably going to make it along with Glasgow and Billings. But it could really depend on what they want to do to really split that group up, because they could go 4-inch and 5 interior guys, or vice versa. It really depends on how much versatility they're going to count on for the guys that they do keep. And with the linebackers, yeah, like obviously any group that includes Hardy Nickerson has questions in it, and it's really up to Jefferson, it's up to Pratt, it's up to these undrafted guys, it's up to Davis as well to really just prove that we don't need this guy who runs a 5.7 40 just because he's somewhat adequate on special teams, and it's going to come down to the preseason and them just making plays and just proving why they do belong on this roster, because they do have some athletes at the position, but so far, it's just been pretty much the same old story with how they look, especially against the passing game at that position right now.
So one thing I saw, and I don't do a lot of the I read the comments on Cincy Jungle and everything, but I don't necessarily interact, and sometimes I just don't get around to reading them. You and I are busy posting stuff, doing this show, writing stuff, so unfortunately, some of the comments go by the wayside. But one I thought was interesting before we get to the running back situation. It was from a commenter, Zach2305, that says Ethan Carter is more likely to be the fourth tight end, and the author, by the way, that's your new nickname, the author. Doesn't even mention his name. He fits the H-back mold better in the offense than Shrek. My contention with that, and I got your back here, author. I think Drew Sample's filling that role, and you can correct me if I'm wrong by what you've seen in camp, but I think that he's going to kind of be a catch-all lineup everywhere type of guy, including maybe at times in front of a running back, go out in the flat and make a catch. So in that way, I think he's a guy that, while I'm not personally comfortable with the idea of keeping 3 tight ends because CJ Uzomah has battled injuries in his career, so has Tyler Eifert. I think that if you're going to go heavier somewhere else, like a wide receiver or something, I think that's where a Drew Sample maybe kills 2 birds with 1 stone by his roster spot. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not. And honestly, I haven't seen them use an H-back that much in camp. And I don't know if it's just because they just haven't got to that portion of the playbook yet. But people have to remember that this is the Rams offense that they're interjecting into this personnel grouping stuff and whatnot. And they didn't use a lot of H-backs or fullbacks in that matter. So I honestly should have included Ethan Carter in the paragraph, but I don't think he'd make the team because they want to line him up in the backfield, because that's not what they've been doing in camp at all. They've been out of the shotgun, and they've been out of just the I formation, single back formation look. So I haven't seen very much of an H-back, and I think that should have been expected if you had any idea what the Rams offense was doing the past couple years with Sean McVay in there. So Ethan Carter definitely still has a chance to make it, but I don't think he would make it because he has versatility as an H-back. And you're definitely right. Like, both CJ Uzomah and Drew Sample can do that efficiently. Even Tyler Eifert, for that matter. But I don't know if they want to use him like that to preserve him from any more fluke injuries. But yeah, that's basically what I would have to say.
Right, and I think that if it came down to potentially keeping an Andrew Brown, a Josh Tupou, maybe a linebacker, I think there are a number of players the team would consider keeping. No offense to Ethan Carter, maybe he's listening to the program, but I think there are a number of bubble players that would make the team ahead of Ethan Carter. That's just my opinion, but who knows? And again, something to note that, and I don't want to speak for you, John, but my assumption is that this isn't John's hopeful roster projection. This is using who you think will make it. Yes, some guys you like, but also taking into account a new coaching staff and what this team has traditionally done. It's kind of a formula you use to create this, right?
Yeah, and honestly, we have no idea what Zach Taylor and his group of guys are going to construct this roster. Like all of our precedents are basically lost with the absence of Marvin Lewis there. So I didn't really look at what the Rams did for their final roster last year. Maybe I should have for this, but this is honestly just like a lot of gut feeling with basically what I've seen, what I've written down, and yeah, like. I highly doubt they go 7 receivers and 3 tight ends. That was just something where I just had to basically keep it down to 53 and make that number for the final post. But like again, this situation is extremely fluid, and a lot of injuries are impacting the sentiments right now with how this projection is looking right now. And again, it's just a lot. It's just way too early to make this with any vindication, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess we can kind of segue a little bit into this, because this is some news that hit this really on Wednesday of this week. The Bengals activated Rodney Anderson, a guy who had tore a knee ligament last year with the Sooners. Probably would have been a day 2 pick if he stayed healthy for the Sooners the entirety of the year. Probably one of the first running backs off the board. By most indications. The Bengals grabbed him in the 6th round, one of 2 running backs they grabbed in the round, Travion Williams being the other. Williams was the first of the 2 picks, but Anderson started training camp on PUP. I think he tore the knee pretty early. I think it was maybe midway in the season. I'd have to look, and it was maybe October.
It was week 2.
Yeah. Oh, it was early. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah. So, you look. Carl Lawson, if you want to use him, he's back and practicing. He tore a knee last year, a handful of games into the season for the Bengals. The guys are coming back from these a little bit more quick. Sometimes years ago, John, these used to be career enders, right? And now, just because where medicine is and how these guys are able to come back, these guys are coming back in less than a year from these things and playing football. So, how do you? Was this something that you think was kind of in the plans in terms of timelines, and he's rehabbing well and things are looking good? Or do you think this was maybe exacerbated a little bit because of an injury to Giovanni Bernard, who's been, again, that hasn't really been divulged. This has been a scary offseason in terms of, he's okay, but then all of a sudden, boom, gone. So do you think that kind of made them make this move off of Anderson, off of PUP, come a little quicker than expected? Or is this just in general something that's a good sign? Bernard will come back when he comes back and he should be okay. And Anderson is just a guy they're going to have in the stable, and they're going to have a really, really strong running back group.
I think it's more of a good sign, and it's maybe I'm just thinking too much out of the box here, but like Zach Taylor and his staff, like they're coming into a situation where the team is notorious for mishandling injuries to an extensive degree, where you have multiple cases in the past to look at. And I think it would be bad for them to start by rushing back one of their more promising draft picks, and then having him re-injure, something that probably should have been or could have been avoided. But just I've had the opportunity to witness Anderson and the other guys on the rehab field just like warm up and just like do usual stretches and just go through the motions. And from my extremely unprofessional and untrained eye, like Anderson, I think he looked like he was ready to go. And I think, like maybe the Mason injury and the Bernard injury maybe could have rushed it a little bit, but I don't think that they would have rushed him back unless he was 100% ready to go. And like you said, like it's been 11 months now since he did tear that ACL or whatever the injury was, and naturally guys come back a lot faster than that compared to years past. But I do think there's a fine line to kind of balance between situational, the situation being dire at the position and kind of getting him back as quickly as possible, but also making sure that you establish a regimen or a procedure of how to handle these kind of things, so you don't keep a narrative and a stereotype going from the past 16 years. So I think he is ready to go, and honestly, I think the timing couldn't be better, because eventually we're going to have, if Anderson is healthy for this season and hopefully the foreseeable future, there's going to be a discussion about whether or not Mixon's value supersedes the value that Anderson brings as a running back. So Rodney Anderson being healthy as early as possible is definitely good for the team as a whole, and I think they did bring him back when he was ready, not before, even depending on the situation at hand.
Yeah, so interesting situation there. And Spencer Myers in the live YouTube chat says, is it standard to keep 4 running backs? I feel like it's normally 3, but I don't see an odd man out if Anderson is healthy.
It was always 4, I think, with Pierman on the roster.
It was. Yeah, it was. Because he obviously didn't get really many opportunities on offense. He was more the special teams ace. But, they kept 4 running backs and did it that way. I think that, that is a position group where injuries occur, wear and tear occurs. Mixon, for all the great things he did last year, he missed a couple of games. Giovanni Bernard in his career has been dinged up. So there are times where, this team has needed other running backs that are lower in the pecking order. And so maybe that's where, keeping 4 running backs here makes sense. But good stuff from you, John, on the roster projection. If you have not checked that out yet, go look at it on cincyjungle.com. It's on the top front page of the stories there, along with some other training camp news and notes, including some of those from John Sheeran. Speaking of that, John, was there anything else you maybe wanted to add on that front that or expand upon based on last week's show? You talked about some training camp observations. Was there anything this week that you feel like, hey, this is new, or this is different, or these are things that maybe some fans want to hear about that have not been able to get to training camp practices, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I just reemphasize that the left guard battle is, I think, still far from over. And like we saw with that clearly updated depth chart that AJ Green listed as starting receiver, John Jerry was listed as starting left guard, but I don't think it's too late to panic on that front, because they did have Trey Hopkins taking first team reps for multiple days, and then they rolled out Michael Jordan there, who honestly, I think with just the situation at the position right now, I think they felt like they just have to try all options there. And it was reported earlier in the offseason that they were trying to focus Jordan on, snapping and improving his center capabilities in case they need him there. But he was out there with the wanted left guard. So that's 4 guys at that position. And when he was out there with the starters, you had Christian Westerman and John Jerry, of all guys, at the second team right tackle, and Christian Westerman at second team right guard. So they're trying multiple things, because that offensive line is far from a finished product, and I honestly have no idea how it's going to get constructed when it's all said and done, because you're dealing with the 3rd offensive line coach in 3 years, obviously a new head coach as well, and a lot of fresh talent there. And for the most part, you have guys mainly sticking to where we've seen them, at least from the beginning of the training camp, have O'Shea Dugas, the undrafted guy from Louisiana Tech at second team left tackle for the most part. Keaton Sutherland, the undrafted guy from Texas A&M, the guy that Jim Turner coached for the past couple years. He's been a mainstay at like backup left guard and maybe a little bit of right guard as well. Trey Hopkins has obviously been all over the place with Billy Price's injury, but that group I think is still far from over. You only have like really one opening at the starting spot, but again, Jerry is the listed starter, but I think that battle is still far from over, and you can kind of rest your hand off of the Armageddon button there for just a little bit more.
Well, good to know. I think some of us have had our finger on that button for a little while, but that's okay. That's okay. Thanks. Good stuff from you there, John. We're going to get to previewing and what we're looking for in preseason game one, what we're interested in watching in just a second here. As I mentioned, we will be doing a live listener questions standalone show. We'll be doing that this Friday afternoon / evening, depending on where you're located. Probably about 6 p.m. Eastern is tentatively when we'll set that. You can check that out. We'll have it posted on cincyjungle.com ahead of time so you can join it there. We will also have it posted. We'll have it, posted on our Twitter account, and hopefully we'll have more of this technical stuff figured out. Jason Von Stein also asked, are you going to do a show during any preseason games? What we will do, unfortunately, I will probably not be able to do it after this first game, but after the games are completed throughout the rest of preseason and throughout the regular season, we take it's usually through cincyjungle.com's Facebook page, so you have to like that page. It's usually myself that goes on there to do about 15, 20 minutes to recap the game, take some questions, that sort of thing. So we will still be doing that. And if you're unable to join us right after when we do that on the Facebook feed, that video and that audio, we put that on all of the channels here for this show. So you can join us live on the Facebook feed, or it'll be available on our platforms, and the video will be available as well. And by the way, those platforms are iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, YouTube, and of course all the stuff's on cincyjungle.com. So hopefully that helps. And by the way, for those wondering, Jason Von Stein is the artistic genius who gave us a little bit of music for the show. So on a lot of our videos that are on our YouTube channel, they begin and end with a tune that Jason has come up with, and it's very, very cool. It's a tune called Mr. Misery, and he let us know that tune is actually on iTunes, and since he is such a loyal listener, a good guy, and supplied us with that music, we ask that you maybe support him in searching for that tune on, I believe he said it's on iTunes and other things, Mr. Misery by Jason Von Stein. So kind of a cool tune. And if you like the tune and you like this show, go do him a solid, go do us a solid, download that song for him. We hope that you support Jason in that, a fellow Bengals fan. John, we are moving on here. I can't believe it. This year has gone by so fast. I guess it's because we've been busy and everything. But the first preseason game is here. New coach, new era of Bengals football, all that good stuff. And there is a lot to like when it comes to what we've seen so far in training camp from the Bengals. There are a lot of questions as well. I don't know that we'll get a ton of answers coming up here this Saturday, but let's just start with this. And I think I know where you're going to go with it, but what are you most interested in seeing in preseason game number one as the Zach Taylor-led Bengals take the field?
I just think how he, as a coach, operates, not only just the extremely vanilla game plan, but how he reacts to how the starters do. I think I don't know. I think his plan with the snaps distributed is going to be pretty fluid, depending on the success or failures of the offense and defense and those starters as well. Maybe I think from what we've seen in years past, I believe they had the first team offensive line out there for like a series or two with the second string quarterback and receivers and whatnot, just so they can gel a little bit more. So maybe that's something that we see again for this year. And on the defensive side of the ball, how heavy that rotation on the defensive line is going to be, how we see those young linebackers get implemented early on into the game. And, we just got to like tone back our expectations, I guess, for what we expect to see from this offense so far, because I'm sure Taylor's going to keep the playbook close to his chest, not roll out a lot of exotic things in that nature, and again, just be patient with the progress of guys like Dalton and other guys we expect to improve under the scheme and whatnot. But again, it's the first preseason game against a team that beat them by like 30 last year in the same stadium. We're talking about the Chiefs, obviously. So maybe, the players who were on the team last year played with a little bit of extra fire, at least in that first drive, even though it's a preseason game and they probably shouldn't be going too hard out there. But just in general, how like Taylor manages, the things that we're accustomed to seeing under Lewis, and hell, maybe we see better clock management in the first couple 2-minute warnings under the Zach Taylor era, even though again it'll be with mostly backups in. So yeah, just the general differences and contrasts that can be made between him and Lewis, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be interesting. You hope that kind of stuff is not too big for him, and if it is too big for him, he's got four games to figure it out. So, I think that is definitely something to keep an eye on in terms of game management. Are there going to be the stupid penalties that you can attribute to coaching? The too many men in the huddle type of things, the illegal substitution. Those types of things. Are those going to be part and parcel of preseason week 1 because of potential jitters, because of an inexperienced coaching staff, that sort of thing? It's hard to really get a grasp on how good a team is or isn't in the preseason, especially in preseason game 1. And what you really tend to notice, especially in the later quarters of the preseason and especially in the early games of the preseason, is there is a lot of run plays called. There's a lot of leaning on running backs, that sort of thing. We just talked about a number of running backs, Rodney Anderson and Travion Williams, Joe Mixon, Gio Bernard, all of these guys and more, Quentin Flowers from last year. I think that is, and the Bengals have said they want to run the ball quite a bit in this Zach Taylor system. They want to set up play action. I think that for me is going to be a very interesting thing to watch, is how successful it is. And it's not just the running backs, it's the guys in front of them, like you kind of mentioned, John, the offensive line. How does that whole group work? Is the I guess, to use a weird phrase, is the sum greater than the parts, right?
Right.
Are we going to look at a unit that, because of the system that they run and because of some familiarity with the coaches and potentially some of these running backs, is this going to be something where they're just, aside from looking at each of these offensive linemen individually, somehow as a unit, and in this new system, they can mask deficiencies and they're able to run the ball and do what they want? Or is this going to be a thing where it's going to be just an absolute circus and 3-yard losses and struggle to get 1 or 2 yards? I don't know exactly how that's going to play out. My guess is probably somewhere in between, but I think, to me, that's something I will be, I'm really curious to see how things shake out this week. What are you hoping the Bengals accomplish? I know it's kind of a similar question, but a little bit of a variation. I think we can both agree that injuries to a minimum is something that is of utmost importance. But what else are you looking for them to achieve? A lot of times people don't really care if they win, if a team wins in the preseason, but what are you hoping this team achieves? And by the time this game hits all zeros on the game clock, you go, okay, I feel pretty good about what I witnessed.
Like you said, obviously no injuries. My expectations are just generally low because there's an entirely new scheme and there's a lot of flux going up front. It's entirely possible that you can see the first group of offensive linemen out there for one drive, and then like the first group again, but maybe with like another left guard. Like maybe that's something that they're going to do. I guess I want to see, just from my perspective, equal opportunities for guys who are in position groups with a lot of turnover and some young guys who I want to see, have their chance to play and shine. And maybe like another thing, like the leash for younger players, obviously under Marvin Lewis, was extremely short, and if there was a mistake, they would get pulled immediately, and we would never see them again. I want to see Taylor allow these guys to make mistakes, because again, this roster is extremely young, and it's a lot of the guys that he and his coaching staff have brought in. So I want to see those guys just play loose, play with fun or whatever, and just not be afraid to make a mistake. Not have this glaring figure over their shoulder every time they make one single little mess up and they're on the bench for the rest of the game. Because obviously you want to give the guys on the bottom of the roster plenty of chances to succeed and make their case, but at the same time you don't want the guys in front of them to be so worried about the guys behind them. You want competition to breed the best out of the players, but at the same time you don't want it to be an overarching figure that overall diminishes their aptitude to play. And I think that was something that was a big negative, at least in this stage of the Bengals season with Marvin Lewis. And I want Taylor to show not more compassion or forgiveness or whatever, but just let these guys play, basically, and don't be this authoritative figure that punishes them for making just a simple mistake, and just let them go with emotions, let them just develop on their own on the field, because they're not going to get better on the bench. And I guess just seeing these guys have equal opportunity and just not be afraid to make the mistakes that they're inevitably going to make, because again, it's preseason week 1 and these things are going to happen.
So this is kind of a weird question, and I'm going to try and phrase this as competently as possible, because I don't know if it's going to come out the same way I'm thinking it. But if you were to, ideally, in an ideal world, the team would be both. But it just kind of made me think about it based on what you just said and the Marvin Lewis era, and how certain guys would be in his doghouse and they would never get out of his doghouse. And obviously the last 3 years have been pretty. I don't necessarily. If last year was miserable, at least the last half of the year was miserable. But in all, I mean, if you collect 2016 through 2018, and even if you want to include the wild card loss from the end of 2015, it's been pretty miserable. Would you rather see a team that comes out in preseason week 1 that is more emotionally charged up, on fire, and you can see that they are having an immense amount of fun playing football again? Or would you rather see, maybe a bit more buttoned up, disciplined, maybe a couple fewer penalties, and not as sloppy play in week 1, if there is such a thing? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. Selfishly, I just want watchable football, but I know that's what I'm rarely going to get in the preseason. But ultimately, we're not really going to remember this game when it's all said and done at the end of the season. We're going to remember. If we're going to remember a week 1 game, it's going to be the regular season. And for that passion and fire that you were alluding to, they better bring that week 1. But for now, I just want them to just go through the motions and just do what they're told, I guess, and just not get injured. I'm just mainly looking for no injuries, but and obviously that I won't get bored out of my mind by the middle of the second quarter. But I'm sure there'll be some of that. I think with the first team, and obviously those backups are gonna play their hearts out because they're playing for their jobs and whatnot. But ultimately, I'm not gonna remember this game that much because I'm not a coach in that way, shape, or form. But yeah, I'm just not really concerned with that just yet, I guess.
So okay, so like I said, ideally you'd love to see both, because obviously winning and playing good football breeds a fun attitude usually. So. Ideally, you'd like to see both, but I guess baby steps a little bit in under this new staff. But like Matthew Wayne Smith in the live YouTube chat says, I want to see chemistry in the linebacking core. Yeah, that'd be good. So if you could name 3 players that you are specifically looking at this week, who do you think, who will you be having under the microscope? I think that, I mean, obviously, at least for me, and I won't give mine yet, but at least for me, I think that it shouldn't necessarily be the quote unquote starters, because I don't think they're going to get a lot of time. So I think at least for me, we're probably going to be talking about a lot of bubble guys, a lot of backups.
Yeah, for starters, I want to see Andrew Brown off the edge because it's still very new to me, and I'm assuming it's still new to him. I want to see, like, he looks more flexible and explosive, at least in practice, and I want to see that translate against backup offensive linemen and how indicative that will be of the actual thing. But I'm curious to see how he does in this rotation, and if he's exclusively on the edge like he's been in camp. I want to see Michael Jordan. I want to see where he lines up with the second team, or even if he gets a shot with the first team at left guard, if he's just at center, if he's just at one of the guard spots. I want to see how he does. And I think all eyes will be on Damian Willis, the wide receiver from Troy, who's just making the most noise, I guess, out of those undrafted guys and those rookies from this camp so far, because if he keeps improving and if it goes into the preseason, it'll just be nearly impossible to keep him off this roster. And when you're talking about having your 6 receivers essentially locked up, he's going to make an intriguing case to bump one of the staples off. So, this is his first chance to really prove himself with either Brian Finley or Jake Dolegala throwing him the ball, or maybe Jeff Driscoll if he gets time with the twos. So he has an opportunity against a pretty weak secondary, especially when you're talking about going up against backups. So those are probably my 3 right now.
So recap again, you said, was it Damian Willis?
Damian Willis, Michael Jordan, Andrew Brown.
And Andrew Brown. I like it. Good stuff. For me, I think Travion Williams is one. I'm very interested in. I really like that kid, and he has seemingly. You can correct me if I'm wrong. He has seemingly done some good things in camp.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that he's going to be a good, pretty good backup football player for this team going forward, and I'm excited to see what he can potentially do in some in-game scenarios. Unfortunately, some of these guys that would get in-game regular season reps at a specific position would, they're not playing. Oftentimes they're not getting carries or touches behind a starting offensive line. So they're usually backups or guys that may not make the team. So, I mean, that they're kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit there. But even so, Travion Williams is a guy that after a good showing in camp, I'd really like to see what he has. I think for me, Ryan Finley is a guy I want to see something out of, and I don't want to see him just turn. It drives me nuts. And I get it because it's preseason and it's a backup. It's usually backup quarterbacks, and a lot of times these are guys in their first professional game. But how many times do you see when you bring in a guy in the preseason, a backup quarterback, and what do? All they do is turn and hand the ball off and/or screen passes. To me, you don't think necessarily at a player like that, but at the same time, I mean, it's preseason, and you kind of got to start seeing what some of these players have. So I hope that a guy like Finley would go out there and get some opportunities to throw the football and hopefully prove why the coaching staff really liked him and moved up for him in the draft. The other guy I've got my eye on is Jordan Willis. I think I mentioned this, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, that it's a big year for that guy. And it's a year where he needs to. I mean, you had him, I think, off your projection, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's not that far fetched of a scenario. So, I think that it's a huge camp for him, and he needs to have one of those types of camps that a Dante Moak had a few years ago, a Chris Smith had a few years ago, where you go, wow, there he is. That's the guy, to really make people comfortable that, he can do some things. It's interesting because I look back to, there was a comment that Willis made, I don't know, maybe going into his second year, where certain players weren't with the team anymore. And he had said in his rookie year, not everybody was very welcoming to him. Now a lot of those guys are gone. It's a new coaching staff. I wonder if he's kind of an under the radar guy, like a John Ross, who might be just kind of reinvigorated by things. Did you say he was having a good camp?
I haven't really noticed him that much. Like, he's made a couple plays against the awful backups at offensive tackle. He's mainly been at right defensive end for that part, but it's more been Kerry Wynn getting those second team reps, and also Wynn obviously playing inside. I haven't really seen Willis playing inside on passing downs, so maybe they're keeping him on the edge. But he's been getting opportunities in special teams as well, so I think he's still pretty much in the conversation. You can pencil him in for the roster right now, but I think he's still far from a lock unless he just has just a solid or spectacular preseason.
Yeah, so that's kind of who we've been watching, or who we will be watching as the Bengals take the field in preseason game 1. Do you have any kind of a score prediction, John? I know it's hard. We usually do that, but it's hard preseason game 1. What do you think?
I think it'll be fun. I don't know. Like, I think the Chiefs won like 30-12 last time they played the preseason. Yeah. That was a Jordan Willis game, I think, too. I think he popped off that game because that was his rookie year. But I don't know, probably be something wacky, like 19-12 or something like that. I don't know.
Well, we'll see what happens. There's a lot. There are a lot of different things to watch, a lot of things to hope for, and win, I guess it would be nice, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there, and we'll see. Hopefully they stay healthy. Hopefully that they show some good things going forward. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've had a big show talking about preseason game 1, talking about a roster projection, an early roster projection, as well as some other news and notes, including the Bengals donating to a fund for victims of trauma in the Dayton shooting, as well as the running back situation with the team, where the team activated Rodney Anderson off of the PUP list. So a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to go off of. We're going to get out of here. Before we do, John, any final thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, football's back, baby. That's it.
Yeah. I unfortunately don't get the same live broadcasts as some of those in the Cincinnati area, so I got to get creative with it. But enjoy the game, everybody, however you may be watching. I will not be able to do a video, as I mentioned earlier. I won't be able to do a video right after the game, but I will probably be able to do one Sunday to recap. If you want to join us, it'll be on Facebook Live to submit questions and comments, and then we can, we'll put that on our audio and video feeds from there. So, you can check that out and join us if you can. There's, as I mentioned, though, there will be a listener question show on Friday afternoon, so please join us for that to kick off preseason week 1. And then, we'll have all kinds of different, like I said, audio and video, and CincyJungle.com will have the game covered from all kinds of different angles, news, opinions, analysis, all that stuff. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Google Play. You can get it on the Megaphone platform as well as on YouTube and CincyJungle.com. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in live. Thanks for those of you who did tune in live. Thanks for dealing with what we've been dealing with on some of the technical issues. We'll get it fully sorted out. I think this week was better, hopefully, a better experience. It was a better experience for me in show than it was last week. So I appreciate everybody's patience, including yours, John. We'll get this figured out, bud.
Yes, we will. undeniable faith in your prowess in this regard.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but and if you have faith in my prowess, we may have some problems, but we'll get it sorted out.
I'm a Bengals fan. I always have blind.
Well, thanks everybody, and thank you, John. We'll see you soon.
Whoa, Vicky.